something like a SORA comes out, for example. A few years back, we would have thought of it as magic, and now we are like, you know what? Yeah, sure. Many people think that Nvidia has been lucky. Frankly, you can't be lucky 3 times. Capitalism is not going to allow this monopoly to continue for a long time. Sundar Pichai is the Joe Biden of AI. It's rude at many levels. I agree with that, but it has a kernel of truth. Okay.
I'm sure some stuff is happening in a very legit way to access that.
Most of it is happening in an illegit way, Vivek. Google, with all due respect, has done all that it could to piss off consumers. We should worry more about politicians spouting authentic nonsense and fake AI avatars generating inauthentic gibberish.
Good evening and welcome to Thinkly Talks. We are back with Jaspreet today after a long break in his community plurality dialogues. So Jaspreet, welcome back. How's it going with you?
Thanks, Vivek. Yes, it's indeed been a long time. You know that in more ways than one, I was down a rabbit hole in the last month or so. And a good afternoon to you. Actually, I'm in Cambridge right now in the UK, and look forward to this chat from there.
Right. So, I remember seeing a post which talked about that how when you got back to Cambridge, you had the rabbit waiting for you. So, would love to see that.
Yeah, actually, I keep it right next to me. So this is the rabbit.
Wow.
About that, but I don't know if you guys can see it. That's the rabbit hole I was talking about. But unfortunately, still down that rabbit hole because I've not been able to make it work.
Okay.
So, I've been able to make it boot, but I'm unable to make it connect to a network. So I need to do some R&D.
Right.
But yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. Though we, as expected, almost the 0th generation of these products, whether this AI pin are a bit going to be like the Palm and the pre-smartphone devices, and they are not going to be the best out there. But it's still exciting to have. Yeah, to kind of look at something which will be a generational change on how we use devices.
Right. It's actually quite brutal for startups nowadays, right? I was actually talking to some entrepreneurs the other day, saying that nowadays when you launch a consumer app, or in this case, a consumer device, our expectations are set so high. Our tolerance for products which are a little clunky, not working, is just not there. I mean, you and I definitely remember the first version of Facebook and Twitter. I mean, it was embarrassingly, horrible UI, all, on the browser. But I think the expectations are just so difficult, so high for them. So it's actually quite difficult for the new companies, right? What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. 2 things, in fact, Vivek. One is you're absolutely right that the expectations have become much higher for everything coming in. And combined with it is that our attention spans are much lower.
Right.
Yeah. So, unlike times when we were young, which was a while back, we would love to tinker with stuff and, open it up and make it work. Well, for you can't open up these things. But now it's like, press of a button, it needs to work. If it doesn't, my attention moves elsewhere.
It's gone, yeah.
And the other thing I've noticed, which to me is even more troubling, Vivek, is that we've become jaded. Okay, so, something like a SORA comes out, for example, or, a GPT-4o. A few years back, we would have thought of it as magic. And now we are like, you know what, yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever. So...
I mean, like, what would it take for Sam Altman to pull out of, what kind of a rabbit would it take for him to come out, which will wow you for a year? I mean, that's like a lifetime now. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the thing is that he brought out a rabbit with the ChatGPT. But now when he brings out better looking or better performing rabbits, it doesn't really work. Now people need an elephant now or something else.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Like we discussed, let's try and maybe, a lot has happened over the last 4 to 6 weeks in the world of AI. It's really working and across multiple dimensions, right? And, so we just thought, maybe we could start off by doing a quick overview on some of these things and, maybe just take the conversation the way you like it. I think just great to just catch up with you. So let's begin, I would imagine with Nvidia, which has been firing on all cylinders over the last 1 year. And I think finally around June 18 is when it briefly surpassed Microsoft as the world's most valuable company. I remember you had actually posted a poll where I think less than 5% or 10% of the people actually predicted that at some point it would overtake Microsoft. I mean, I think you probably never anticipated it will actually surpass it so fast, right? So any thoughts about that?
So the poll was interesting. There was a less than 3 months, within a year,
Yeah,
5 years, whatever. And virtually no one posted less than 3 months. Not even me. I said within a year, and it
right,
actually happened in a couple of months, less than a couple of months after the poll.
right,
And so, yeah, I mean, look, I think in a couple of things. So one is, with every new revolution, there's always a company which tends to initially benefit the most out of it, any
right,
technology revolution. So when the internet revolution happened, it wasn't it wasn't as much a Google or a Facebook or whatever. The company which became the most valuable company on earth was Cisco. It was laying the highways for the internet. And it
right.
briefly became a $650 million or something similar. And I think the Cisco for the AI era
Hmm.
is Nvidia. And obviously, the world has changed. Valuations are much more. And so now we're looking at a 3.2 trillion or whatever for it to be the highest. And with 80% of the market share. And importantly, what people don't realize is also CUDA, it's software which is used to work with their chips, is a big moat. And so 80% market share of all GPUs plus CUDA is actually and then the insatiable demand from everyone. And it's not just the big techs. It's the big techs, it's the large companies like Goldman Sachs or Bloomberg, etc. And now there's sovereign AI. So all the
Yes,
countries, the Indian Prime Minister had to personally request Sun Huang for some number of GPUs. So that's
right.
in our they have ultimate pricing power, and that's why 3.2 trillion. But I will say one thing, which is the interesting meta thing that I want to just convey, is that it's amazing that it's a hardware company which has become the most valuable company on earth. Usually it's software, right? And hardware
That's
is,
right.
and it's heartening that it's a hardware which has become the most valuable company. And I do think that if you're looking at a 3 trillion or so for Nvidia right now, the next big hardware company which will, and probably for that time, the next revolution, which will be a $10 trillion or whatever, would actually be a company which makes the quantum computer hardware again,
Mm.
not as
Mm.
much as software. So it's interesting, how hardware companies are kind of coming to prominence, and that to me is the biggest takeout from the whole Nvidia bike.
Right. Fascinating take. And, in fact, I think in one of the earlier talks, we talked about how Nvidia is not behaving like a hardware company when it comes to its margins and, the contribution margins. I mean, it's behaving literally like the
And it's
Microsoft.
updates. It's updates every yearly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, so it's we're really looking at a very different world. In fact, if you look at Nvidia, its EBITDA went from $5 billion to $35 billion. I mean, they were insane. If you look at its trailing PE ratio, 76, its forward is looking at around 47. So neither you and I are really stock analysts, but I think it begs the question that we really assume that Nvidia will stay where it's at, because currently there's a major hunger for compute, and it's definitely there for the next few years, right? But really, as somebody who's an observer and expert in AI, what do you think Jason is really up to? I mean, like, do you see them moving into services? Do you see them getting into maybe platforms themselves? Some thoughts on that, right?
We could do this entire episode on
I
Nvidia.
agree.
But here's the deal. Couple things. So first of all, many people think that. So I'll say two large things. The first
Mm.
one is many people think that Nvidia has been lucky. Well, frankly, you can't be lucky three times.
Correct.
Okay, the company almost died a couple of times. He started off making these graphic processing units for gaming, knowing that gaming is going to become big, and gaming became big, and Nvidia became a reasonable sized company. And then the whole crypto thing happened, right? Crypto blockchain stuff, especially crypto. And suddenly people required special ASICs, which were, crypto-oriented hardware for mining. And here was this man, he said, you know what, the same way the GPU architecture, let's kind of change it around to crypto. And he made boatloads of money more, and it became $400-500 million company.
Yeah.
Then generative AI happened. And again, he was on the ball, saying that, look, you know what, the way you actually can do this much better with GPUs. Now, since I think he's already he realizes that it's not about one more Blackwell or Grace Hopper or any of these other newer generations of chips that they're bringing on. He's doing two things. One is CUDA that I mentioned, which is the
Yeah.
software to become a moat for other companies. And then he's getting into, as you rightly said, services. And I think the next big hyperscaler cloud provider that we are going to see is probably Nvidia. Okay, but they're going to have purely a GPU cloud and
Right.
AI because everyone can't buy, right? And so the
Mm.
whole way the clouds worked, the normal clouds worked as well. So he's going to be ahead of the game. Having said that, let me come to the second point, which is contrary to what I just said. I don't think that this capitalism is not going to allow this monopoly to continue for a long time. Okay. I have gone out on a limb in various forums, including my article, saying that price for compute, for large language compute, is going to fall by between 50 to 90% in 2 to 3 years.
Right.
Yeah, and there are reasons for that. One is obviously other competitors coming in. AMD is doing well. Intel is gearing up. The big guys, the big techs are building their own chips. The second is large language models are giving way to small language models. And
Yeah.
so you will not require that much of compute, after the whole
Correct.
LLM frenzy is through. And
Mhm.
then the third really is that it's not just the compute. There's lots of work happening in terms of just how the transformer algorithms and newer versions of the transformer algorithms, actually can juice out more compute from power from a limited amount of compute. So
Right.
I think with all of these, and which is good because then for enterprises, generative AI, APIs, etc., will become less expensive than now.
Right. And that has to happen if really you want this to be sustainable. Because the problem we have is the calls, the tokens are so expensive right now that only an OpenAI or a tech giant can really afford it, right? There was a very interesting take on this. In fact, there's this company which I believe Chamath is an investor in. It's called Grok with a K. Sorry, with a Q, the other way around, right? And
No, it's GROQ. Yeah, GROQ.
yeah. And I think the whole thesis of this company is the fact that when it comes to really training, you really need a GPU like the Nvidia's. But when it comes to inferencing and the calls, that's really happening all the time. You could actually do with low cost CPUs, and that's really the way. So I think what you kind of laid out there. There will be ways that people will kind of start breaking it down, and it's going to be very interesting, right? As we move ahead. But moving across to another post I've seen of yours, which I found very interesting, and I think we exchanged some text on that. You made a very interesting insight about innovation versus distribution. We're seeing all these companies like OpenAI, which are, you could say, pure play, AI companies, and now Gen AI companies, and Anthropic, which is again raised, I think, close to $4 billion from Amazon and the like, right? But on one side you have these companies, and then the other side you have the incumbents, which is really, there's Google, there's Gemini, there's Microsoft, there's, probably you could say Grok from Elon, Facebook. Yeah. Apple, yeah, we should. And, you really, kind of brought this and said, while it's good that, OpenAI has kind of started this whole innovation, but finally, you kind of laid out that distribution is really going to rule. Your distribution via, let's say, Google versus Microsoft's Teams versus Apple's AI, right? So, really would like you to double click on that point and talk to our users about, what you were thinking about.
Sure. So that's another place where I'm putting my neck out. I need more necks. Here's what I think. So, one is that, again, as these new waves, these new revolutionary technologies happen or come, the question often is whether this will be more of an incumbent play or a startup or innovation play. So, for example, if you look at the internet was a disruptor play, not an incumbent play. The incumbents got disrupted by people called Netflix, by people called Google and Facebook and some of the others, Amazon. Okay, the incumbents were disrupted by the startups. AI, and you can actually go back and see many industries where sometimes it was an incumbent play or a disruptive play. But AI, most of the evidence points to the fact that it's going to be an incumbent play. Okay, the incumbents are going to actually win rather than disruptors, and that's because of three reasons. And then I brought the fourth reason, but the three reasons which are normally mentioned is compute and the cost of compute,
Mhm.
which we all know. And then talent, expensive talent, and then most of all data. So if Google has all the data, okay, and Microsoft has all the enterprise data, etc., then those are the three building blocks for any large AI model, and all three belong to the incumbent. And there's only so much the disruptors, and that's why the disruptors, each one of them, OpenAI,
Mhm.
Anthropic, every one of them, Mistral, all of them have had to tie up with an incumbent. Otherwise, they would all fail, like some of them failed, because you can't get that kind of compute power, etc. But then the fourth reason, which is what I brought out in what you just said, was distribution. Yeah, and we many times undermine distribution because the sex appeal is in the innovation. And so if you look at Slack versus Microsoft Teams,
Yeah.
Slack many would say is a better product, though I don't use Slack frankly, but many would say is a better product. I don't use Microsoft Teams also much because I don't think it's a better product. Okay, but
It's quite
Microsoft
horrible.
yeah, Microsoft Teams today is 10x or 15x of Slack. And the
Right.
reason is so is because there are a couple of billion, 2 or 3 billion computers which have Microsoft 365, and they have just used that distribution muscle.
Right.
And thus, I was coming at that time to Google versus OpenAI, and they both had their developer days one day after the
One
other.
day after the,
Yeah,
yes.
and OpenAI's innovation was far more superior. But what
Mhm.
Google really did in their 2 hour very rambling Sundar Pichai talk was that basically they said that they will just infuse their product in every one of their massively distributed products. YouTube,
Right.
couple of billion users, Gmail, more than a billion users, Chrome, etc. And so what I wrote was that Google really doesn't need to out innovate OpenAI. It
Mm.
just needs to out distribute it.
Mm.
And that seems to be their strategy. And frankly, Vivek, both of us have been there. That strategy is copied. The copybook, the playbook is Microsoft's,
Microsoft.
where they would bring a good enough product, but
Mm.
distribute the hell out of it.
Right.
And competition would die. And I think Google is going to do the same thing with AI and therefore distribution.
Do you see a FTC or a Justice Department stepping in with a consent decree that I think at least in the 10 years that, in the period that I was with Microsoft, I mean, that was like the sword hanging over us, right? And I think in some ways, the reason why Steve Ballmer couldn't really innovate, if you're going to be nice to him, in that sense, some people actually call him as not the best CEO, but was really because of the overhang of the consent decree, right? So do you see any of those legislations coming in, or the lawmakers still haven't really figured out what the hell is happening to kind of double down that path?
Yeah, yes. And one more thing. So definitely Google is in the crosshairs of every regulator today, most of all the EU, but
EU,
even
yeah.
even US, which is
Mhm.
surprising, and even India here,
Mhm.
okay, for their Play stores, especially for the App Store. And so definitely Google is under pressure, and it will affect, and it really is going the same path as Microsoft is. And a lot of the innovation is not happening because of that pressure. You know how it is that regulation always is a few years behind any move that some of these companies would make. And so I don't think it will only be regulation which would stop it.
Mhm.
But I think, and that there I come to the second point, I think what Google probably has a crisis in terms of, sure, the regulators coming in, but a bigger crisis, here's my third neck out, okay,
Mhm.
is about its leadership. Yeah, and I
Mm.
think at this point of time, the leadership that they require is different from the leadership that they have.
Right.
I don't know if it was just yesterday's meme, which I saw was that a little rude, but it said that Sundar Pichai is the Joe Biden of AI.
Ah,
Okay. So, uh,
it's rude at many levels.
it's rude at many levels. I agree with that, but it has a kernel of truth. Okay. Uh, we require some fresh leadership in a sense. And look, Joe Biden was a great president, and I think Sundar Pichai has been a great CEO. So it's not about that.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
it's about just newer thinking and your. So I think it's a combination of leadership and the regulation part. In the innovation department, they are not lacking at all. In the
Right.
people, they are amazing people. Demis Hassabis and his team are the single best AI team. And we many times forget that Google is the only company on earth which has full stack AI.
Yes.
Right from the chips to the applications. No
Right.
one else has that. No one.
Right.
None of the companies, not even Microsoft, none of the companies. So they're sitting on a gold mine. They just need great leadership to unlock that might.
I mean, you talk about proprietary training data. Of course, people have pointed out that the confidentiality agreements and the privacy agreements don't allow you. But I mean, they're sitting on a gold mine. When you look at those millions of YouTubes getting uploaded every day, the Gmails that people are writing, I mean, I'm sure some stuff is happening in a very legit way to access that.
Most of it is happening in an illegit way, Vivek. The user agreements of YouTube and many others don't actually allow you to. They keep changing. They don't allow them to scrape your data.
Right.
Forget about Google doing it. I think most of SORA is built on YouTube.
Yeah.
Legitimate.
So I think the playbook is very clear, right? I mean, it's about the incumbent trying to turn an innovation into a feature. I mean, that's what it really comes down to in a certain way. We've seen that happening with Copilot, with Gemini. You probably see that happening with YouTube and different elements of that, right? I mean, interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So moving along, what do you see is really the opportunity for multi-such independent companies to survive? And I'm obviously talking about this on the back of Ilya Sutskever. I mean, he suddenly surfaced after the failed mutiny that happened, I think, towards end of December. Everybody was really wondering where he's up to. And I honestly thought that he's going to probably pop up somewhere in the Twitterverse. Because he got introduced to Sam Altman by Elon Musk and somewhere out there. But he actually started his own independent company called SSI. And one is, of course, what do you think he's up to? And second thing, if you could dwell upon, do you really believe that there's enough place? Because I think now all of them are in a way getting commoditized, right? We talked about the ABC of AI. We talked about compute, the same big data. We talked about algorithms. They're all eventually looking similar. So is there a place in the sun for yet another SSI or the like?
You could say the same about Perplexity too, right? Well, I know slightly different conversation which we could have. But see, Ilya is probably the guy who was most instrumental in building GPT and OpenAI. He was the chief scientist, and he's also well known to be Geoffrey Hinton's protege. One of, if not one of his most brilliant students. And so I would ever, people look upon him as God, probably the number one scientific brain in AI, generative AI, along with Andrei Karpathy and a few others. But I think he's kind of up there. So I think wherever he is, he's going to do some amazing things.
Yeah.
I agree with you that he's chosen a positioning which is about safe AI. In a sense, it's like Apple's positioning about, safe privacy, private stuff, but then Apple is Apple. And so he's chosen this position. There's no knowledge at all of what he is planning to build, who's backing him up, except a few small initial investments or anything. If I was to hazard a guess and again pull out one more neck from wherever.
Jaspreet and the Ravana, the 10 heads of.
Yeah, the 10 necks. I should write about me and the 10
I think you should. I think make for a great article.
Yeah, and each of them would be like this prophecy, right? So I think that the company would soon become like an acqui-hire by someone. Okay, the same way that Microsoft and Philemons happened, right? It would be an acqui-hire. Who knows? Maybe by Elon Musk itself or by someone else. Because however great, phenomenal the guy is, I think it's going to be difficult. Coming back to the incumbent bit that we talked about, it's going to be difficult to survive and thrive. So they will carve out a positioning, and in many ways, Vivek, this whole safe AI positioning in itself is very difficult, right? Because that's how OpenAI started. Okay, that's how in fact DeepMind started. Okay,
right.
But all kind of succumbed to economic pressures, and so it's not as
the confidentiality agreements and the privacy agreements don't allow you. But I mean, they're sitting on a gold mine. When you look at those millions of YouTubes getting uploaded every day, the Gmails that people are writing, I mean, I'm sure some stuff is happening in a very legit way to access that.
Most of it is happening in an illegit way, Vivek. The user agreements of YouTube and many others don't actually they keep changing. They don't allow them to scrape your data. Forget about Google doing it. I think most of SORA is built on YouTube.
Yeah.
Legitimate about Perplexity also in a similar way, probably.
Right. No, somebody actually said that. Listen, if you really have to compete, like you pointed out, it's ultimately going to be about capitalism. It's going to be about really bang for the buck. It's about how the product is really innovating at breakneck speed, and in which case, safety is the first thing that will have to be compromised for a new AI platform to succeed. And somebody said that it's almost like expecting the DI group of erstwhile Twitter forming a new platform and hoping them to succeed, because that's not going to happen, right? So we're really, looking at some things really stacked against them the moment they talk about safety. Uh, but I think before we double down, and I think the next question was on perplexity, I just want to pick up a question here from Anupama. It's slightly on a different tangent, but I thought it'd be good to get your view. Is that hi, Jaspreet, this may be a little niche, but with the advancements in AI for object recognition and natural language processing, how can we develop AI system that can effectively analyze complex visual narratives, such as those found in comic books or graphic novels? Could such AI be used automatically to generate captions, translate languages within the comic, or even create new storylines based on existing visual elements? Would love to know your thought process.
It is a bit, as you said, niche. It would require some certain level of expertise to answer this, but theoretically, it's possible.
Yeah.
See, the whole thing about generative AI is that it's not, many of us think of generative AI as text into something. So you put text, we think of it as one many. Okay, so that one is text, and that text can be to text, or text to visual, or text to video, or text to, well, protein structures, or text to whatever, right? So it's text to, but that's not true. Actually, it's anything to anything. Okay, so it can be actually visual to visual also. So theoretically, if you were to show generative AI a beagle dog, a beagle, I mean,
Right.
one of its answers could be an Alsatian. Okay,
Right.
as in you're kind of creating something similar, right?
Mm.
So, or a German Shepherd. So theoretically, therefore, I mean, all the technologies I think exist to do this object recognition, etc., that you spoke of, Anupama, to kind of parse out a story from a comic book. I think it's very, 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 very doable. I think even your current tools would do it.
Right.
If you were to just upload a comic page to GPT-4o and say, what does this
Yeah.
mean? What you're saying, it's going to do it, right?
Right.
Can it create a new one? Sure. I think so then the next prompt, if it is that, can you kind of work around a newer script and it can. And potentially you can even say that, okay, fine, basis the newer script, can you reconvert it into another comic? So I think all of those are, now the quality of it is going to depend a lot on how well you prompt it.
Right.
Okay. And also, I guess, how mature the models are at this point of time to do it. But absolutely, I think it's possible. I haven't tried it, but maybe you should try it.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting experiment, right? I'll just take a couple of more questions. I think this is interesting. I said, Mayuri asked that, in your opinion, what are some of the most surprising or unexpected ways AI is being used today? I think that'd be interesting take from you, considering that you've been exploring so many
There are, I can't remember some of these amazing things. So let me just talk about one personally, and second one, which I really, really was blown apart from a GPT-4o demo. Personally, I think, and actually not to say anything, but Sam Altman also thinks it's something he didn't expect. I mean, I didn't expect is how we can use AI, generative AI, and I'm focusing on generative AI. Okay, generative AI as a brainstorming partner. It's actually an amazing brainstorming partner. I didn't think it would happen. You would still need to brainstorm with a human being, but you can actually brainstorm everything pretty much on any topic. Okay, with that, I think AI. So if that's just personal, and Sam Altman's, okay, AI, non-gen AI, I think the most brilliant thing that has happened with AI is what DeepMind's AlphaFold, and now called isomorphic, has done with proteins and molecular biology.
Yeah.
And solve these crazy problems of how a protein would fold. Creating new proteins using generative AI is just amazing. But the third, and the one which blows me away is, and you should look for it on YouTube, etc., is about how, again, GPT-4o, they did a demo how it can help the blind see. So there's this guy who has GPT-4o on his phone, and he has his guide dog. And the guy's in London. He's in London. And, he wants a taxi. And so he kind of points it to the road and there's a taxi coming, and the taxis which are full, it just tells you no, no, no. And then then the phone GPT-4o sees that there's a taxi which is vacant, available. And it says, okay, Jim, there's a taxi coming. And then it says, okay, now it's 100 yards away or whatever. And it's right about there, stick out your hand now. And he sticks out his hand and the taxi stops. Okay. And then it says, okay, the taxi is stopped. It says, now you can open the door, go in. It's just completely amazing, right? I mean, to me, this is singularity. Okay, forget about all the robots or whatever.
Yeah.
This is what it should be about. And so to me, Mayuri, that was the of the lot, the most amazing things that it can be used for.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant demo. And in fact, in the post edit, we'll try and put that clip as you talk about it. It's a brilliant one. And there's a very interesting take out here, which is really about, well, of course, they talk about translation. How Meera is asking, how accurate is AI in translating complex literary stuff compared to human translators? Because obviously the training data that's available is slightly different. But Jaspreet, I'm sure even you've come across, right? I mean, they're now looking at using AI to understand the language of the whales, because there's enough sonic data that's available. And I don't know, tomorrow you probably may extrapolate that to, let's say, animals. I mean, like dogs and cats, and we'll soon start having a conversation at home. I mean, what's your take on that? Or are you aware of any research that's happening in that direction?
Oh, yeah. So look, let's take it in two parts. One is just translation of a language into another language. As again, you saw in the GPT-4o demo, which Meera Murati gave,
Right.
For basic, language stuff, English to Italian, in this case, it's amazing. Duolingo, the big translation company's stock dropped some 10% or 14% or 20% that day. But then people realized that, and I retweeted that too, it was beautiful, that you don't learn a language just to be a tourist. You learn a language because you, as a human being, you want to learn new things.
Right.
Okay. And so, because language learning is not just about, I'm going to be visiting Rome tomorrow or whatever, or next year. So I need to. Lots of people learn languages just to discover new cultures, new words, new people, new friends. And so that won't go. Okay. And so while there could be functional translation, which AI could do, it will not replace the passion for learning that a human being has. And then there's a difference between translation and transliteration, right? Yeah. To the point that Meera asked, that certain classics, I mean, if you were to translate, say, Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali, using GPT-4o, it would come out as fairly vapid. Okay, so you need context, you need translation.
Context is important.
Yeah, context, you need that, that ethos, that culture. So, but then the most interesting area, as you rightly said, is about translating animal sounds. And I've been down that, since we're talking of animals, I've been down that rabbit hole too. Okay, and there's some very interesting research happening. It has ethical issues. I mean, so I'm kind of torn between should we really try and translate or not. But anyway, keeping that aside, the real problem in there is training data. So there are only so many whale sounds that you have. Okay, and it's not about just whale sounds. You need data on what does this particular sound mean. Okay, that kind of, so
you got unlabeled data, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. So I think people are trying to solve that through various ways. And eventually, with human ingenuity and tech progress, it will happen. But yeah, right now, elephants, whales, dogs, a bunch of poor animals are are creating training data. Okay, for this kind of translation. Interspecies translation to happen.
Yeah, that's going to be one fascinating thing if it really works eventually. Which I'm sure at some point.
I think we'll soon get jaded of that also. I mean, we'll be like, yeah, I understand what the dog is. Big deal. Okay. Right now, there's some mystery in it. Your dog is trying to do something. And you're guessing, you're interacting with the dog. There's so much of communication happening non-verbal. Now, tomorrow, if you know that it means you want to go pee, I mean, so anyway, that's what
I think one interesting use case for the R1 is, something looking at the other person, tell me the non-verbal cues that person is thinking about right now.
Yeah.
Because That could be interesting because language is one thing, but really picking up those things would be interesting. But I think with that, moving across to, I think the last 2 points that I want to touch upon, what is really about perplexity? Like, I mean, it's really been in the news. They were pretty savvy happening. Arvind Srinivas, again, another Indian origin CEO out there. And, I think it's two things. I mean, one is, of course, the point that you talked about that even people thought that OpenAI would really disrupt Google search. And that didn't necessarily happen, though, of course, people are using OpenAI more and more, still doing strong. So at one side, it's really about the incumbent will win. But on the second side, they're saying that, listen, I mean, search is now, 20 years old, 25 years old now, and it's ripe for disruption. And companies like Perplexity are the ones which will probably come and, make a dent. So your thoughts about that, and specifically about Perplexity.
So here's the fifth neck on the block. Perplexity is not going to destroy Google search. Google is going to destroy Google search. Google, with all due respect, has done all that it could, has been doing all that it could over the past 5 or 6 or 10 years to piss off consumers.
Yeah.
While they have done everything to make advertisers happy. So one thing which Arvind Srinivas said was I don't remember the exact quote, was very, very insightful, was that same unit which gets produced when you type a search query in Google, that unit that gets produced is the same unit which needs to get monetized by an advertiser and consumed by the consumer who's searching. Now, who are you catering to? Okay, should that unit be optimized for the advertiser or for the consumer? Right. And right now, it's being optimized for the advertiser. You go to Google search today, it's a terrible user experience. Okay, where it started was amazing. Okay, and then the 10 blue links you have, like sponsored, and then something, and then sponsored, and then on the right hand side some videos sponsored. Okay, so you're not really sometimes someone like a Perplexity there has a much easier job. Okay, but then obviously Google search is happening also because it's an English word. But also because of the network effects, right? That it's just using Google search. Perplexity, I think, is probably the first credible answer to Google search, not because of any other reason, but because it serves search up in a different way. So Bing also was primarily for the advertiser. I mean, that's the business model. Okay. Now Perplexity serves search up in a different way, right? So it kind of just obviously we know how it works from a UI perspective. It's like a chatbot, etc. But then it kind of is not ad monetized at this point of time. It gives you sources for everything. Someone I know described it very well, and they said that, look, if you type something in Google, you might have 7 million. It says 7 million pages, whatever, in 30 seconds or 3 seconds, and what Perplexity does is it just reads through all the 7 million, okay, and serves up a summary to you. Yeah. In Google, you can only see the top 10, right, or maybe top 20. Here, it's going through all and then kind of serving up the summary to you. So just because of the way it's served and because of the lack of business model issues, and so is where Perplexity is. Perplexity for me now has become, frankly, and for many people, who in my community has become the default place to search. And after that, you go to, and so I think there's definitely something out there. Perplexity has its own problems. There's been a lot of brouhaha recently in terms of, how they've been scraping, violating copyright everywhere. Yeah. What will be its business model? We don't know. Okay. And therefore, its valuation is not very high if you take a look at it, frankly. I also think it will be bought over by someone. I'm waiting for the day Microsoft is going to buy Perplexity, because it's going to be better than Bing as a threat to Google. But I'll end by saying the same thing that I started with. It's not Perplexity which is going to kill Google search or weaken Google search. It's going to be Google itself, unless this forces them to change the game completely. Right. Even the Gemini integration into Google search is half-hearted, because the powerful people who control the revenues, and obviously, I mean, they've got the most amazing business model invented by humanity since cocaine. Right. Okay? And so no one wants to disturb that. And that's what will change. actually be the downfall.
I think the biggest problem that you have that they're really grappling with and why they prefer the status quo is the fact that when you show links, you can really order the links based on the money that's come to you, the sponsored link, and so on and so forth, right? But if you're looking for that one answer, how do you monetize that one single answer, right? And I think so that has to be a subscription model which probably will probably never scale to the level that you have. I think that's a very existential threat that they are facing conceptually. Now the question is, will they actually come up with yet another model like they did in the past? Is going to be interesting, right? There's an interesting comment here from Zayed saying that, look, I like how Samsung is integrating AI into its products now. So now you're seeing more and more hardware devices, and you might want to linger on what you see will happen with AI, with the Apple intelligence.
Linger. That's the word which Lex Fridman uses a lot. Okay. Look, Zaid, I haven't really seen any Samsung phone with AI. As in, I haven't seen as they exist, I know, but I haven't experienced. So I have no idea what they are doing well, and I'm sure they are. Look, I completely do believe that the future of AI, Gen AI, is edge AI. Okay, where AI is embedded in devices, and it solves a lot of problems, and people are building chips for that and models for that, etc. Orca and various Phi 2, and a lot of models are coming up. So I seriously do believe that, and I tend to agree with you, Vivek. I think the big 800-pound gorilla in this is Apple. Their Apple intelligence. Okay, and I think there's a lot of, I mean, just because our devices carry every piece of information about ourselves and our intentions and our history and our likes and dislikes, there's a lot of play just to, kind of take that data along with the data in the world and then serve up, what you really want. My view is that, a lot of this would actually then mean that the app world in the device will disappear and the agent world will come in.
Right.
The obviously is the first attempt at that, but and so and it's very possible that again this will become an incumbent play. The rabbits of the world will die, and it will be Apple or Samsung or some of the others which will quickly bring in AI into edge devices and change everything to become a new kind of device. So for example, and just to kind of conclude, again something I've written about is the fact that the mobile phone and the app ecosystem, the way we know about it today, is going to die. And the screen will be replaced by voice. So you don't need a big screen. So you see the screen of the is just this much. The OS will be a large language model, and the apps will be agents, which will do stuff for you, not just be dumb apps. And so I think we are seeing a massive shift in how these devices will be all driven by AGI. And to kind of finish up, I mean, that to me is the true magic, if it may, of generative AI. We
Right.
haven't scratched the surface. We think it's about summarization and these chatbots, which is great. But the real thing is about how it's kind of redefining the relationship between humanity and machines, and how that distance is becoming lesser and lesser.
Right.
And how, as like in the brainstorming thing that I told you, we would start working with them the way I work with you or any of my other colleagues. And that's what is really going to happen to the phone also. Again, I deviated from the question, but
No, I think it's a great answer. And I mean, just to kind of re-articulate what you're saying, I think a great technology is the one which is really transparent, is invisible. Because you don't need to see that you are playing with technology. I mean, like an Apple perhaps is the best equipped to do that. I mean, one single voice command and things happening in the background, and eventually the stuff being served to you, right? I think that's what we are looking for. Maybe finally a reason for some of us to upgrade to the next version of the Apple phone, because hopefully that's going to happen with the 16 or whatever version they're on.
All of us except me. Anyway,
I know. Yeah, you're an Android family with Samsung with your folded phone. Yeah. So there are two quick questions, Jaspreet, if you could pick that up, before we kind of bring this to a close, kind of related, So Alia is saying that I'm curious to know, how do AI algorithms learn from their mistakes? And what are the key methods used to improve the accuracy over time? So one is that. And Jenny is asking a related question. He says, how are reinforcement learning techniques being used and being applied to improve AI-generated art and music? So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, again, I'm not a super expert in this, but yes, I mean, both of them, as you rightly said, are related. You know, so one one kind of learning in AI is what is called reinforcement learning. Okay, which again has its pros and cons, but the reinforcement learning really is about how the answers to specific questions, you you can kind of tell that whether it's right or wrong, and basis that it improves its performance over time. That's how, frankly, this works. And
Right.
and it told AI, you predicted sales, and later on you could figure out what was the deviation between, say, what the AI predicted and what were the actual sales, and then you basis that, you feed that in, and it keeps on learning. In chat gpt, what I wanted to say in the beginning, you uh, get an answer, and below that there's a little tick mark and a cross mark which they encourage you to. So if you type the tick mark, which means you're happy with the answer, the cross mark, you're hallucinating,
Right.
you're not happy, and that human feedback actually goes back in to improve the model. uh, the other big term, which is kind of very popular these days, is reinforcement learning through human feedback,
Yeah.
RLHF,
Yeah.
which is basically the same thing, except that that's much more, you know, much more just not a tick mark. It's kind of people, hundreds or thousands of people, experts who kind of are hired by OpenAI to check the answers, etc. And that's how successive GPT generations have become less and less hallucinatory than the earlier ones. And so this kind of reinforcement is absolutely a critical and integral part of training models.
Right. Right. I mean, I was just thinking and smiling, like how when you do philosophy, there are six, pramana, way of knowledge, right? Of knowing things: perception, awareness, comparison, scripture. And I was just saying that, when AI will probably going to come with something similar, right? I mean, these are the 4 or 5 ways of gaining knowledge, right? And some, ecosystems work on one and some ecosystem believe in the other. It's going to be interesting for us to kind of figure that out someday to talk about that.
The Ramana thing is super interesting. In fact, I in when I was reading Indian philosophy and during Cambridge, I wanted absolutely, how we can look at each of these pramanas and ways of
Right.
six ways of
Yeah.
learning, really.
6 ways. Yeah. So,
Yeah, six
yeah.
ways of learning in AI. And you're absolutely right. There are ways to map that, and no one really is looking at that, Vivek.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
big gaping hole, the big research area hole, which
Mhm.
is ripe for some few scholars to come in and look
Yeah.
at, among other
Yeah.
things. You're
We,
absolutely
we,
right.
we should talk about that someday. It's fascinating. Yeah. And just to kind of bring this to a close, we done with elections in two major democracies, and the big one is still left, which is in November. But there were a lot of these thoughts, and I think some of your concerns about how deepfakes, AI will actually hamper the whole democratic process, right? And then you had a very different view that actually didn't, and in some ways it helped. So what are your thoughts about that?
I'll try and keep it short. For people who want to read a longer one, my latest last Friday's article in Mint was about that, and you can find it on
I'll
jaspreetbindra.com.
drop the link on the chat. Yeah.
Thank you so much. But again, there was a bit of a contrarian neck out stand that I'd put a lot of. I think I must have had at least 50 plus queries from various press outlets in terms of deep fakes and how they will corrode democracy and destroy elections, etc. That danger was there, but I was trying to bring in this fact that it can actually help elections also.
Hmm.
And after the elections are over, the Indian elections, the UK is just now, and anyway, the effect was much lesser. There's been some great research done actually, and I quote that in my article about from the Kennedy School of Policy by a couple of scholars as to how in India possibly I actually helped do elections better than harmed, and they have evidence around that, and how candidates used it for languages, creating content cheaply, bringing up Jayalalitha and Karunanidhi, and how smaller candidates leveled the playing field with the bigger ones
Yeah.
with lots of money by
Yeah.
actually using these. And while there obviously were issues around, but you think about it, the biggest issue in the election was about people dying from heat waves, which
Yeah.
was terrible and the wrong thing to do and right. But
Right.
that was the story. Okay, the story wasn't about massive amount of deep fakes coming in and
Mm.
screwing up the elections. And this was written brilliantly by James Thornhill, who's one of my favorite columnists. He writes in the Financial Times. And he said we should draw lessons from the Indian election to say, let's not make a big deal out of this. We need to have some measures, but there's also ways it can help. And he
Mm.
ends his article with a very wry note, basically saying that we should worry more about politicians spouting authentic nonsense than, than
Yeah.
fake AI avatars generating inauthentic gibberish.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and so that's the real problem. I totally agree.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. I think, so this was fantastic and really enjoyed catching up with you and, really kind of, kind of summarizing about what's happened, getting an overview of what's happened over the last 4, 6 weeks. I think the community really missed you. There's just so many questions that are here. Couldn't take them all, but let's see. I mean, maybe we could just
I will answer
browse through
and
that.
promise not to have a gap of such
Right.
magnitude. So in a couple of
No,
weeks.
but you've been really getting around, so it's understandable, and it's good to see that you're back and healthy, and So I think with this, Jaspreet, for the wonderful session, and really, I think all of us are taking away something interesting. I'm taking away a small discussion on Praman. Very interestingly, I'm going to connect with you offline on that. I think it'll be an interesting thing to kind of, go down yet another rabbit hole and see whether there's something that could be, that could come out of that, right?
I might have
So,
an answer for you too. So let's connect offline.
okay, great. So you have a great evening, and look forward to the next session soon. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Apologize to the community for being absent for a while, and thanks for coming back again. And look forward to see all of you and you, Vivek, soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
Have a good one.